Still no green dot. There we go. All right, now we got a green dot. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of our DFS Roundtable, which we do from time to time. We like to bring everybody together like a big Thanksgiving family reunion. I guess you don't have family reunions on Thanksgiving, but you know what I'm saying.
Great start.
We like to get all the collective brain power together to discuss some things. And of course, we are joined by the #1 DFS player in the world, Osmo, better known as Alex Baker, better known as Osmo. I always do that backwards. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I think it's better known because you're a human being to me. You're not this faceless enigma who makes money and robs food from all the people's tables on all the GPP tournaments across the industry. We're also joined by Andrew, our first video together. Andrew, how are you doing?
Yeah, what's up, man? Nice to meet you. I'm excited to do some talking about some sports. You know.
Yeah, that's what we're all here for. Andrew, of course, seen every day on the A to B videos, along with Ben Rasa, doing some good stuff every single day there that you guys need to check out. And last but not least, or maybe least, the Chubster, Josh Engleman. Josh, how are you?
I liked it better when baseball was over and we didn't have to interact.
Yeah, we didn't have to interact like Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's true.
That was our church.
And we'll be back again in 2 weeks for NBA, so nothing changes. I'm good. Yeah, everything's good.
Yeah, but we are going to bring some information to the people. We're going to talk a little bit about NFL strategy today, kind of have an open forum thing. I believe the genesis of this roundtable actually began with Andrew asking some questions of Alex about his process. And I do want to turn it over to Andrew a little bit up front because I think whatever questions you have, Andrew, will be a good jumping off point. I've picked Alex's brain a lot. Josh has as well. Guys in the chat, we encourage you to drop questions as we go. But Andrew, why don't you start this little roundtable of ours and give Alex whatever's top of mind for you.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, Alex, I was just kind of interested because obviously we see your lineups and everything you put out there quite often. But as someone, I use Cruncher quite often, and I know that you do too. But I was kind of interested on some of the specific sort of ways you go about it, in some of the, I guess, where you go around with some of the advanced options kind of deals. Are you someone that sets a few things and then just lets it fly for 150 or 300 or whatever? Are you going through a couple at a time and kind of, redoing your options? Do you like to lock a player here and make 5 lineups that way, or is it a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I'm really excited that we actually have Fantasy Cruncher on the site now, so we can start talking about some more specific strategies using it. Fantasy Cruncher obviously has a lot of really useful settings, and we can go through a lot of them. But also, I think it can be useful to not only build lineups on Fantasy Cruncher and then submit them, but also have something on the back end. You can kind of download your lineups, sort them however you want, come up with your own systems for ranking them and stuff like that. I think that's one way you can use Fantasy Cruncher to be even more powerful. I know they've recently introduced some new features which I'm not as familiar with yet about optimizing for ownership and any other. You can add your own categories and stuff like that. So I see it getting more powerful. I think that's awesome. You can do some more of that on the front end now. You can also kind of add stuff of your own, just using some basic Excel spreadsheets. So that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I was looking more. Is there anything specifically when you've set your stuff? Are you trying to optimize it for all of the lineups you're going to build, or are you going through it a couple lineups at a time and changing things around usually?
I usually just build as many lineups as I can, essentially. And then the question is just sifting through them, trying to figure out which ones you like the best. I find that's a little bit more time effective than trying to put all my resources into building one lineup. It's kind of build a ton, see which ones I like the best. And everyone has kind of a different system for evaluating what their best lineup is. Because I think at this point, you can't just take your highest projected lineup and be like, oh, I'm going to submit this. You got to factor in correlation. You got to factor in ownership. So there's a lot of different things you're trying to optimize for.
Okay. So you will try to get your sort of, you're optimizing how you want the lineups to be made and then spit out a bunch of them and then you go through them and kind of pick which ones that you like the best.
Yeah, exactly. So like one strategy I like for NFL is doing a game stack. So if I want to put all my, if I want to do a game stack, I'll just set that and only optimize lineups using that restriction. So I'll just explain how you do that for everyone real quick. You go to advanced options. The way I do it is I do the positional stacks. You can stack your quarterback with 2 players from the same team essentially, and then you can also stack like require that one player from the opposite team be included in all your crunches. Or you could do it differently. Like I think that having 3 players from the same team along with the quarterback is viable. Maybe you have your own system for how you want to stack, but I find it's most effective to kind of like create some basic criteria for how you want to like set your lineups, and then use Cruncher, and then you can kind of evaluate which ones that you build are the best.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing I don't know, something I've always not always done, but something I've like gotten into lately that I've found to be pretty helpful to get myself exposure to some of the more dart throwy kind of guys I like is, in the groups tab you can build, and I think what people often do for their groups is they use that to try to get the guys from the same team they want, like you were saying. But I don't know, I've had some success lately trying to go in and say like, all right, here's the 8 or 10 sort of lower owned punt plays that I like, and make a group out of them and say, hey, put at least 1 or 2 of these guys into each lineup. Find it gets a little more variety without having to like, hit the green thumb 3 times and one more guy, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So you could kind of like create a system for how you want to like make your lineup differentiated. So you could use groups to do that. You could be like, well, these are the chalk plays. I want a maximum of 3 chalk plays, and then 1 like contrarian play, and then you leave the rest of it open or something like that. That's definitely like a really interesting way to go about it. I also like the groups, especially for smaller slates or showdown, because you can set a key player, and you can say, well, if I have Kirk Cousins in the MVP slot, then I only want to have him MVP along with 1 or 2 of his wide receivers. And then you can kind of eliminate some lineups that aren't going to be as correlated as you would want.
And you can see some of those. Ooh, sorry, Chris. I don't want to step on you. You can see some of those features in the most recent process show video that I did breaking down how to work through Fantasy Cruncher. Check that out on our YouTube channel. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, you're cutting me off for a plug. Even better.
Yeah, I'll plug for myself. You got to get it in when you can.
No, that's fair. I get it. Speaking of plugs, by the way, a lot of the stuff that we're mentioning does go well with Alex's rankings. Become a premium member of Osmo.com, 1 week free. Use promo code. We don't have one for this. Promo code Contrary, 1 week free. For all of Alex's rankings, his ownership projections, and his various articles that are coming out every day, a little bit less frequently now that MLB is out, but more coming up for NBA and NFL. So keep your eyes peeled on that. I do have one question about Fantasy Cruncher, a newer functionality they use, and I'm actually wondering if you even touched it at all, Alex. Do you ever go hand by hand and like tinker with the lineups and switch a player out 1-to-1, or do you just kind of trust your projections to do the heavy lifting?
I don't use that feature right now, but I think one way you could use that really effectively is with late swap. So NBA is coming up, where it's going to be especially important. But that makes it a little bit easier, I think, to late swap on DraftKings, because they don't allow you to select players that are higher priced, I think. I haven't used the feature on Fantasy Cruncher, but like that could be an example of, if you're organized well enough, you could use that to make a late swap like a lot easier than trying to use the DraftKings UI.
Yeah, that website interface is not the best on there sometimes. So you got to use the tools at your advantage, and Fantasy Cruncher is one that we partner with, in part because Alex uses it to great success every single day. I guess one general question I have, Alex, and this is, I guess, could be tied to Fantasy Cruncher, could not be, but I want to tie back to something that we talked about on the Contrary show last weekend. And one of your better picks, which I'll tout for you, you did call out Mitch Trubisky specifically in that show and say he was a guy who could be good. I was burned by him the week before. I wasn't on him, so I went against you. I feel like we're all dick about that now. But how do you approach a guy like Trubisky who, is capable of things, had a really good matchup, and, but I don't know, isn't a good quarterback? Like, how do you approach that? I think for baseball, you get used to playing guys who aren't good per se, but how do you handle that when you're building your lineups?
Yeah, essentially, like the reason I like Trubisky this week, I don't know if I had him a ton, but I had the receivers a lot. Like the way you gotta evaluate a quarterback is the sum of their receivers, essentially, at least for their passing component. So if you like Allen Robinson, you like Taylor Gabriel and Trey Burton, then if you like all those guys, then Trubisky's gotta like look pretty good, right? So the way I was seeing that situation was just that the receivers were so much better this year than last year that I just had him projected to do better. And even though it hadn't kind of materialized in the first 3 weeks of the season, I saw a lot of potential because of how good the receivers were.
I guess one thing too, then with receivers, I saw you had a fair amount of Corey Davis, at least in a couple lineups that I was in the same tournaments with you as, and it's another guy who people were pretty, I guess, not playing at high volume. And even though he's had a ton of targets, obviously getting Mariota back, how much do you expose yourself to a guy like that? I mean, given that, he's going to be 1%, 2% owned, you don't have to do a ton to get above the field. Are there times where you're going crazy above the field in football, or are you just mostly playing it to get a little bit of leverage on the rest of the players?
I think that was just kind of like my system. Like our ownership projections had him ranked really low, and I just thought I didn't think he was a great play, but compared to the price and the ownership, I ended up with him a lot. And more than anything, that was just a lucky pick because he did a lot of damage in overtime, which obviously pretty random. I didn't have him like stacked in the game stack or anything. So that was just one where it's like any receiver any week has so much variance. Like last week is Calvin Ridley. This week is Corey Davis. Next week maybe it'll be D.D. Westbrook or someone crazy. You never know, especially with receivers.
I've got a follow up for that, but it's going to Andrew actually. When you have your projections, if you saw, say, two wideouts that had relatively solid values for a particular game, but didn't have a quarterback, running back, I shouldn't have said running back. If you didn't have a quarterback that had a similarly solid value, would you be likely to overspend on that quarterback just to stack up those wideouts?
Not on its own. Like I'll take other things into consideration. That's where like Alex's ownership projections really help. If it's someone that is going to be 1% because of that, sure. But like, I mean, an example of that kind of burned me was week 1 going the other way. Ryan Fitzpatrick was actually the best per point per dollar value, like in the model. And Cruncher was spitting out, hey, you should play Ryan Fitzpatrick a ton. And I was said, well, come on, are you crazy? It's Ryan Fitzpatrick. But the other part was that Mike Evans was relatively fully priced against like what we thought was going to be a really good Saints defense. And then Deshaun Jackson was supposed to barely play. He was projected to play like 20 snaps. He played like 20 snaps, happened to catch all 5 of his targets for 285,000 yards. But so I just didn't really get onto a lot of that. And it wasn't like Fitzpatrick himself was a good value. Evans and Jackson weren't really. So I had trouble getting there. So that definitely is something that will stop me from time to time. I'm more likely to, quote, overspend on a quarterback because overspending on a quarterback is not as big of a difference. There's not a $3,800 quarterback and an $8,800 quarterback like there are with wide receivers. So reaching for a quarterback I'm more likely to do than I am reaching for receiving options personally.
That makes sense.
One thing to chat, by the way, we do see you guys, see McBee in the chat, one of our regulars, and the baseball savant, Jake Hari, who is now going to be the hockey savant. Fortunately, no website backing that up, but keep an eye peeled for Jake's NHL streams coming up. But if you do have these high-level kind of DFS questions or fantasy cruncher questions or anything for the top DFS player in the world, Osimo, or any of us, just drop it in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it if you guys have things to contribute to the conversation. I guess to Rube, I guess, and whoever wants to take it first, maybe Josh, I'll offer to you first. What have you learned so far in NFL? We're a quarter of the way of the year in, and it seems like it's been a bit of a different game this year with some of the scores being up there. Is there anything you learned which you've been surprised by so far this NFL season?
So I'm playing NFL more now than ever before, and I'm certainly playing it differently now than I ever did before, whereas previously it was do the research and give myself something to watch on the weekends. But now, I spent a lot of time going back through Fantasy Cruncher Rewind. There's the plug for that once again, trying to iron out a process, and very happy with where I'm at so far. I do find it interesting to go directly from baseball to NFL when it comes to ownership and the way that I have stacks of teams in NFL compared to MLB. And it's really taken these first couple of weeks to try to break the MLB ownership mold from my head and get into NFL. And then it's going to blow up again in 2 weeks when you get to NBA and you have guys that are priced at $3,800 that can be 80% owned because they simply are going to get that sort of opportunity. So balancing all of that in this short window has been the biggest struggle, but it's also keeping me on my toes.
It's a lot to adjust to on the fly. Alex, how about you for NFL season? What's been any big lessons for you? Obviously, you've been playing at great success more than any of us. Is there anything that stands out to you as being different this year?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I might throw this one back on you guys, but I'm starting to think that this passing explosion from all these different offenses is more than just an anomaly. I feel like that rules change about how they can tackle receivers may have made a difference and led to more passing, among other changes to officiating and stuff like that. But it just seems like maybe the game has changed a little bit, and if you're using last year's stats to project wideouts and quarterbacks, maybe you're going to be lagging behind. What do you guys think about that?
I'm with you there.
Fully in agreement with you. Andrew, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I think that some of the DraftKings pricing algorithm has caught up to that a little bit, I feel like, whereas the running backs, when I do my projections, a lot of it, it's got some data from this season, but it's largely based on last year's stuff. And the running backs in general are showing up as sort of better values a lot of the time so far compared to the wide receivers. But it is really wild. And I think actually what I wanted to sort of expound on that about is I'm finding that maybe it makes the full-on game stack less of a viable thing. It's almost like with a home run explosion in baseball where you can kind of one-off guys more and you don't necessarily need to run a full team stack. I think with so many just nuclear options at every position, it makes it less likely that you just need I guess what I'm saying is when there's 5 games that score 60, 65 points, it's not like you need to be on the one that did that because there's plenty of other outs around that. Have you noticed that too, Alex? That's something you've been taking into your process at all?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that it's not one game could be a shootout a week anymore. Maybe it's 2 or 3. I still feel having more correlation in your lineup is always an advantage rather than less. And one easy way to do that is with the game stack, but you're certainly limiting your possible lineups. So it makes it harder to hit the nuts essentially.
And I would assume too, similar to baseball, Alex, you would want a correlation thing, given that you want to have the quarterback and the wide receiver from the same team, just because that makes it more likely that you're getting 2 parts of an offense going off.
Yeah, I don't think Andrew's suggesting that you don't have the quarterback with a wide receiver on the team. Plus, if you have the quarterback, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, running back,
opposing tight end, okay, gotcha. You might not need to onslaught the game anymore.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of weeks where just one wide receiver just has a crazy game and the quarterback does really well. I think there was one week last year where it was Derek Carr and Amari Cooper, and he just had 3 touchdowns, 200 yards or something crazy, But I think every strategy has some outcomes that will win you $1 million, and that's why DFS NFL is so interesting, strategically.
One last note on that topic too. There was one piece of data which I don't want to misquote, but I think the gist of it was that the overs have been winning at an incredibly high rate in Vegas this year. I think it was 58% or 60% of overs have won, which has been problematic because obviously most people who are casual bettors like to bet overs. So there should be a Vegas adjustment coming soon, I would think, with that. But overall, everything seems to back out that this has been a historic passing season. I think Jared Goff is on pace for 5,000 yards and Like, I mean, there's a lot of record-setting paces going on. So it does make sense that the game would have to adapt, and there would be some leverage in that point before people fully adjust, I would presume.
Yeah, and I think just from the prop standpoint, like Vegas has access to all the information we do. So you can kind of assume that those, especially as you mentioned, I think people bet overs a lot more than unders. You can kind of assume that what you're seeing is still going to be pretty accurate because they are like adjusting for all of the data that's coming in as well.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of 54-point totals in the coming weeks. There's just no reason for it to go away. The NFL clearly wants to protect quarterbacks, and I think it's made for a better product this year. But a different. I had 233 points on DraftKings this week, and I was like feeling real good. Remember that was like a millionaire maker winning score, and nope, that's like 800th place in the play action.
You won $4.
I really felt good about that lineup too, but not quite enough. Some questions in the chat. T. McB, say you did like a play like Corey Davis, and it wasn't just a player you stumbled on, but a guy you believed in with your full heart because you saw some piece of data that you supported. How much would you cap his ownership at if this were a player you're like, you know what, I just believe in this guy. This all makes sense to me. Nobody else is on him. Like, how much do you ride with a guy like that in NFL?
I don't really have a set amount, but the one caveat I have is that if you have too many of the same contrarian play, if they do go off, you're going to be competing with your own lineups a lot. So like one of the most important things is like, you don't know what all the other 100,000 lineups are, but if you're making 150, you know what your other 149 lineups are. So you can make sure you're not overlapping that much with those lineups. Yeah, I don't really have players that I believe in that are going to have success on a given week. You know, I think there's I have different chances for each player, and I'll just have a few different players that will stand out in my crunches because their ownership is low and I have them as good plays.
Yeah, that seems like a better approach to keep you plus EV over time if you're disciplined enough in your approach. But I think the temptation for a casual player or a player building less lineups than professional player like Alex or some of the other guys in the industry would be to load up on these guys. And I certainly get tracked like that too. But ultimately, you don't want to get locked in on 50% Corey Davis because there's going to be a lot of weeks where Corey Davis just sticks his dick in your ear. Speaking. Maybe
you're trying to beat the field too. That's the big thing. And when someone like Corey Davis, who's 2% owned, you can play 10% and 5x the field. You don't have to play 50%. If you want to get over the field on Alvin Kamara, that's when you got to get into 50% territory. So it depends. That's another way ownership comes into play often.
Makes sense. Torin Edwards asking in the chat, Alex, do you create a player pool to build your lineups?
I just kind of rely on Fantasy Cruncher to do that because I'll set projections for each player, and then I'll let Fantasy Cruncher kind of decide who to put in and who not to according to the exposures I'm setting and stuff. So I don't manually create it, but I do create it by it's gonna, if I have my top players at X exposure, it's gonna select those first before the players I have projected lower.
What do you think people are missing so far this year in NFL? I mean, you see a ton of lineups. You're in a bunch of different tournaments. I'm sure you see many different lineup constructions. And you also wrote about this at some degree of length on Osmo.com, breaking down how you approach stacks and lineup building and all that. But is there any big mistake you see people making more often than not that you're like, okay, that's just this is easy money because this guy's going to keep doing the same error?
The one thing I have noticed is there a lot of times they're these wide receiver 2s or 3s, and so far this year they've been really good, Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley, just being owned a ton, and I don't think the probability those players have GPP winning weeks is very high, and I don't think the advantage is that much more over a player from a different team that might be lower owned. So I feel like maybe that wisdom of the herds is a little bit off in my opinion, but so far they've been proving me wrong.
How much do you account? I know we talked about this with Evan Silva a little bit, but how much do you account for matchups where, a team is particularly good at defending a wide receiver 1? So in theory, then, the Saints, let's say with Marshawn Lattimore, like he was covering Julio. In theory, he's a decent shadow corner, so there should be more, accessibility for Ridley. Do you ever account for that, or is that just something mostly off the table for you?
I do, because I'll look at different projections people have, and I'll kind of look at mine, and if there's like a huge discrepancy, then I'll kind of go back and look at the underlying numbers. Like in general, I don't try to outsmart everyone that much. I feel like if I'm way different than everyone else, maybe I'm missing something. So yeah, I try to account for these things but it's not necessarily like trying to like solve every single factor in my model.
Mike V in the chat says, Alex, it seems like the chalk is hitting more and more this week or these weeks than past years. Do you think it's due to regress, or do you think it's due to the fact there's more good content out there than past years?
I think that might be recency bias a little bit, because like I feel like a lot of chalk plays in weeks 2 and 3 like were just total busts. I can't remember any offhand, but a lot of the running back chalk could just like completely stunk. Like one that I do remember that totally burned me was Latavius Murray versus the Bills. I mean, well, I think it might be just like a selection bias there, like where people remember chalk that does well, and they prefer to forget it if they had those players and they shat the bed.
I think running back is going to be an interesting place for chalk moving forward because of the way the league is going. Knowing guys like Kamara or Gurley, where by all accounts they're going to be involved from beginning to end with a relatively large amount of opportunity. So chalk is this is just my thought process. Chalk is easier to get to at running back because we're getting out of the area where we have a lot of guys we trust. Whereas at wide receiver now, every team's got 3 dudes that are particularly relevant for a day, so you can only concentrate so much ownership there. Whereas, I mean, there's 5 to 8 guys in a given week that you can confidently say this guy's going to participate for the entirety of the game, barring an injury, at running back at least. So the day that the running back chalk dies is going to be the day where like most of the lineups die. Like that'll be the only spot where it really exists.
That's the 175 point winning Millie Maker team.
Yep, exactly.
Though I think even this week, though, there were like I don't want to misquote the actual what happened, but I'm pretty sure the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings was Tariq Cohen, and it was like some assholes. It wasn't Gio Bernard. It might have been Kamara, because you probably had to have Kamara. But I do think people are getting.
No, it wasn't Kamara.
Those pivots. Yeah,
okay. It was Gordon and Zeke, because those guys both scored 35 or whatever on their own too.
Yeah,
cheaper than Kamara. It was wild.
I know. I'm pretty sure Cohen. Whatever. Cohen was in the mix, I think, because he had 30 plus too. And like I think running back though, you can't really farm for those guys that much because they just don't exist. Like Wendell Smallwood was pretty good the week before, especially as a Corey Clement pivot. But I think it's not like wide receiver where you can hope a Christian Kirk or somebody like that goes off. Like running back, those guys. You have 5 backs in the league, like Josh said, who are getting 20 touches, and everybody else is just scrambling for bits. And like I'll go to a Gio Bernard, but I probably won't go to a Latavius Murray again because like. Even with the role, I think that was a unique game, but
he doesn't really catch passes.
Ever.
Yeah, like nowadays, it's going to be really hard to find the LeGarrette Blount from 2 years ago where he's only getting essentially rushing touchdowns from inside the 4-yard line. Like that barely exists unless that guy is a high-end guy. If you can't catch passes, you're dead in the water.
Sonny Michel from New England. I mean, like that guy like got 3 routes last week, but he ended up having a crazy week because the Patriots ran the ball a ton and he got touchdowns. But that's kind of the new LeGarrette Blount, I feel like.
And it didn't even help you. Like he ran for 120 yards and a touchdown or 2. He got 20 points, but that wasn't even really any good last week because you had a ton of running backs that caught 8-9 balls for that's the thing is the running backs that catch 8-9 balls for 60 yards in addition to 12-15 rushes for 75 yards and a touchdown. That's what's breaking slates is when Melvin Gordon and Alvin Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott are just catching boatloads of passes on top of it.
Yeah, when these guys are getting 15 targets, it kind of changes the game up a little bit.
Kamara had 20, not this week, but the week before.
That's
20
insane.
targets.
Yeah, and like James White, I thought was a pretty clever play, and he had a great day. But even still, like I think that's the part that's sort of frustrating is you make these plays, you're like, this is actually a brilliant play. Maybe I didn't make enough of it, but I made it. And then like it actually doesn't help you that much because there's a chalk player who's got the exact same value, who's $500 more. I do think the industry is getting smarter. I think from me playing as a casual, and now I'm doing this research every single day, like an incredible amount of research, an incredible amount of being the most on the ball I can be. And everybody knows the shit I know. That's what I feel like. So I do think the industry being advanced has helped a little, and hopefully our site contributes to that. But in a good way,
it would be nice to have a time machine to, I don't know, 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm. Well, the one nice thing about sophisticated players is that they are predictable. So if you kind of know, it's hard to predict where the recreational player herd is going to go in a given week, but it's easier to predict professionals. So you can kind of, it's just changing who the best plays are, I guess, because the herd's on like certain plays, that makes other plays better than they would have been.
Yeah, people forget about that. It's all relative.
The higher the stakes, the more concentrated the ownership, for sure. That's very exploitable.
Yeah, Mike V says, I think the content is so widespread now, and it's all very similar, in his opinion, site to site with a few outliers. I mean, I think if that part of that is also just because of the nature of the game, and Alex, you could probably talk more about this, but the discipline you're supposed to have is using Vegas totals, and all the best players and the people who are creating content are using Vegas totals as their jump off point. And then from there, you have to learn and think outside the box about how outcomes could end up differently rather. But, at the end of the day, you're using the same basic jump off point, which is the thing to trust. So I think that is expected. But Alex, how do you feel about that, I guess? Because you're very big on Vegas totals. You're very big on the repeatable, predictable things and the concept that if you could beat Vegas, just bet. So I guess, how do you feel about how that affects the industry?
So I feel like, I have access to some industry insight. I did hear at one point that there were 3 million active users on one of the sites. And the number I heard was only like 2 to 3% actually go and look for information beyond just entering their lineup. So there are like a ton of players out there that don't really pay attention, and I think they get kind of overlooked, and they don't enter as many lineups. But the sites have been doing a good job bringing these players in and keeping them playing, and those are the real players that are kind of like providing the lifeblood of the industry. Because obviously somebody has to not be as sharp and not be winning. So I still think there are a lot of recreational players, and NFL in particular, it just like brings in a ton of interest from everyone. So I don't think the problem is as big as people are making it out to be.
When you heard 3 million active users and like 5% of the people are seeking out information, did you immediately think, I need to start a content site? Because that's what I would have done. I'd have been like, whoa, 95% of 3 million people out there looking to get some more information.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard there are 3 million users, I mean, that's some big potential there, for sure.
Yeah, that would have been my first thought process.
That also explains the percentage of winners in general in DFS.
Yeah, 95% of the people are generally losing, so that makes perfect sense.
That's crazy. A1 Dan CD, there's a lot of rookie QBs starting now. Do you use/watch their college stats to try to build a picture for them, or can you just decide from the first 4 weeks of the season?
Sorry, can you say that again?
There's a lot of rookie QBs starting now, and A1 Dan CD is asking, do you use/watch their college stats to try to build a picture, or do you just decide from their NFL product?
So that's a great question. One thing I think that's useful to do is look at the team's success in the past season with a different quarterback, because I feel like an understated part of a quarterback's success is the team around them. So you might have an idea, Baker Mayfield is this much better or this much worse than the Browns quarterback from last year. But you have that baseline from a year ago to kind of compare to.
And this year too, you even had Tyrod's performance where he was at least airing it out, not capably, but he was airing it out. So it does make sense that Baker would fit in and was
better than Deshaun Kaiser did.
Yeah, use Deshaun Kaiser and Kevin Hogan.
Kaiser Sosa.
Yeah, nice. Classic cousin Salism.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Torin Edwards asking, value plays seem to be a tight end more often than not. I mean, they're everywhere, Torin, but tight end is definitely the cheaper position in general. What advice can you give in selecting value plays for players who aren't in good position?
So tight end is like a unique spot because there are only a handful of guys that are even really playable outside of a game stack in a given week. I do remember 1 week you just had to stack 2 tight ends in your lineups. I think it was like week 1 last year, where it was just like Gronk and Doyle and some other guys had huge weeks. But for the most part, tight end doesn't have a ton of production, but you can get some great values. So I just treat them the same as wide receivers as far as whether to put them in the flex spot or not.
Yeah, and I think you're still looking for targets there as well. I mean, that's what makes the elite tight ends elite. I would try to avoid the traps. I mean, like Will Dissly's out for the year, but a player like that who is just generating 50-yard runs and not getting highly targeted, those are generally the guys to avoid at tight end. But the Zach Ertz's who are getting 10 targets a game, or Kelsey, those are the guys who I think you can trust and treat a little more seriously.
Yeah, exactly. I think like a good example is like Jesse James, like had a monster game. I think it was week 2. And like that's just like kind of fluky. Like the answer or the takeaway there isn't you should be playing Jesse James. That like no matter who you pick, like they could just go like for a crazy game.
I think he's not Tyreek Hill, where it's going to be repeatable that he has 80-yard touchdown runs twice in a game.
I think that's more important than you're saying. I think the big thing to look at with tight ends, or more important than you're giving it credit for. Sorry, man. I'm just trying to. You have a profound point there. I think the difference when you're looking at a tight end, they may be a good value, but they don't have much ceiling. And yeah, you occasionally get the Will Dissly 50-yard run, or the Chris Conte falls over himself because Vance McDonald's such a beast. But like those are the outlier performances. So the tight ends, it's like, all right, hey man, like I may get 9.7 points out of this guy who cost me $2,800. That sounds great, but that's not particularly helpful in a tournament. So if you can get a wide receiver who is 3,400 or whatever, that there's a much greater chance of them realizing a high ceiling, which is what you need for tournaments, even though the value might not be there because the floor is lower. You want to embrace variance in tournaments, and tight ends are generally lower variance players.
Yep. Yeah. And you're looking for that 5X now too, which I think is important to remember. It's basically basketball. I mean, or what basketball was. Basketball's now 6X. Football is close to 4X to 5X value on every play.
Yeah, but I think also Andrew's bringing up an important point, because like the roster position is important. So like you don't necessarily want to spend your flex on a low salary player because they just don't have enough like variance to make it worthwhile. You want a guy that's going to get some volume, that has a little bit more variance, seeing more than like 3 to 4 targets a game, which is great for like 2,500, but it's not going to win you a tournament usually.
And 5X from a $2,500 player is different than 5X from a $7,500 player.
Yeah, for sure.
Vigilante's DFS. This is sort of a similar question, but maybe not. Could you speak a bit about how tight of a core that you play? So, Alex, you mentioned that your player pool is pretty much just subject to the whim of your projections. But in terms of guys that you're putting in a bunch of lineups, how tight of a core usually are you looking for that? Or is it still the projections doing the legwork?
Well, I think in my system, everything's kind of fluid, but I think a core is a great way when you're getting started to kind of narrow down the possibilities a little bit to make building lineups easier. So what I would do is, just narrow down the player pool in Fantasy Cruncher to only guys that you like, and then crunch. Like, whereas I'm already doing that by projecting players for each, making projections for each player. So that's how I'm taking care of that. But if you're using third-party projections, then that, depending on which ones they are, it's important to kind of to make sure the players you're getting in are the ones you like.
A couple single entry guys in the chat asking single entry questions. I guess first question, Alex, are you playing single entries right now?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So then I guess how do you approach that relative to the MMEing? Because obviously MMEing, you're not trying to black out the sun, but you are trying to take advantage of more holes and ownership and things like that. Whereas for a single entry, you just get that one bullet. How are you approaching that, and what's the difference in the process for those two types of tournaments?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the ownership in single entry is pretty comparable to multi-entry. So I would just take whatever system I have to evaluate my best lineup, and just put my best one in the single entry. I don't make it any more complicated than that.
And just to chime in there, because I think you would want to say this as well, you have advocated previously in the game plan articles that if you're playing multiple single entries, so maybe a $1, a $2, a $3, a $5, you should be playing a different lineup in each one of those, because the goal isn't to win every tournament in one day. The goal is to pop one of them. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. That kind of falls under diversification. So you want to have your eggs in as many baskets as possible. Like you don't like it's like a great result if you enter the same lineup in every single tournament and then you're like empire maker and you have some screenshot day. But like for most people, they don't have enough risk tolerance to make that really a great strategy. So you want to kind of like spread out your exposure to different lineups, just so you can wager or invest more money and reduce your chance of going bust.
Yeah. I dropped the diversification primer link into the chat if anybody was curious too.
Way to be on the ball, Josh.
I'm all over it, man.
Nice.
I'm all over
Just
it.
the plug machine. You're taking over my mantle. Eric 5, a couple guys actually in the chat talking about preseason NBA. First of all, yes, I am playing preseason NBA. Second of all, I'm ashamed of it. Second of all, Fast Eddie Fear will be coming up shortly with his hour live before lock for the preseason slate. So keep tuned on this YouTube or Periscope, wherever you're watching, because Fast Eddie will be coming up with some preseason talk for you guys where he breaks down minutes. Been doing a bang up job hustling all weekend. So keep an eye on that. Are you playing preseason NBA, Alex?
I did one night, and it was kind of a rough night because it had a late scratch, like 2 minutes after a lock. I can't remember. It was Malik.
Oh, was it Malik Monk?
Yeah, it's like the dude was in street clothes. There just wasn't very good reporting from the game, so that just kind of
Loved Malik Monk at the NBA last year. Had him ready to go for that first game, and then he got scratched because he hurt his. I think he hurt himself with a sex injury. Was what the Twitter rumors were. He had a pelvic bruise or something that he couldn't play with.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to handle as much sex as those guys get.
your pelvis is not primed and ready for NBA competition.
They're professional athletes, man. Those are well-oiled pelvises.
Hey, I do have a friend that walked away with an injury once, but we don't have to talk about that on this particular stream.
I remember Dennis Rodman's injury in his book, in which he broke his member during relations with a lady, and he broke it twice actually, and you have to go to the hospital and get snapped into place. It's a whole thing. Great book.
Oh yeah.
Is everybody else squirming in their chair?
It was true. I remember read it when I was like 10 or 11 or something, and was like, oh my God. And I've been afraid of that ever since in life. It's carried me to a lot of great.
That's why it's bad to try to dunk on chicks.
You can't do that viral video thing with them at all. AO Rhino, yes, you are getting Fast Eddie right after the stream coming up in 10 minutes. So we'll wrap it up now. Any good questions in the chat? So do you have zero overlap on a Sunday, Alex? Totally unique lineups across all your tournaments?
Well, ideally, like that'd be a possibility, but the reality is you're kind of like limited in time. So I have only time to crunch a certain number of lineups. If I want to spread out my diversity a little bit more, I would just have to crunch more lineups so I'd have more good options to choose from. But right now, I'm just using my best 150 in each tournament.
There was one more question in here. Oh, Cos Campbell, this might be a little bit of an overbroad question, but I think, Andrew, you can answer. Actually, all you guys can answer it pretty well. Can you explain your process for making projections? And I guess more than that, can you explain your process for tweaking them as you go if you notice that they're not coming up where you want them to? Andrew, I'll let you go first because you are a projection guru.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a pretty involved process. It depends on each sport is different, but I mean, the basic idea you want to come up with is to find a way to quantify opportunity. Like, how many opportunities is this person likely to get, and then how valuable do I think they are? You know, like in football, especially on DraftKings, like a target is more valuable than a rushing attempt, right? Because you've got that implied probability of getting the catch on top of it. So that's the basic sort of idea of like, I think this guy's going to get 9 targets, and I think he's going to do whatever. You know, he's going to score 3.4 points per target. You can go back and look at something like that, and you know, there's plenty of databases out there if you search through Reddit or whatever, or just if you keep game logs for a little bit. But the basic idea of projections is to sort of find out a points per opportunity, and then how many opportunities is that guy going to get this night. That's why NBA is so important, where if someone's in or out or scratched, you know, because it's not only a redistribution of minutes, but potentially of usage as well. If that guy's getting more shots, that's another opportunity. So it's really all about how much opportunity you can get for the dollars you're spending.
What about you guys? Any thoughts on projections and how you handle them, Alex or Josh?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew totally nailed it. It's just like you want to break it down to different factors. So one easy way to do that is you break it down into 2 basic factors, like the volume and the points per attempt or target, and then you just multiply the 2. And then you can kind of break each one of those down into its opponent factors. And as you build a more sophisticated model, you can kind of incorporate more different pieces of information into coming up with those numbers.
Josh, how about you? You're a projection guru too. A lot of projection gurus. I am the only non-projection guru here.
I mean, everybody's saying mostly the same stuff. I think we're all doing something.
Well, then start talking about the Great British Baking Show, that man.
Exactly.
Very popular on dating app women. That's what we learned.
No, but I mean, we're getting to it again shortly for NBA. That's sort of my main spot. And it's, when you boil it all down, it's how good are these people on a per possession basis, and how many possessions do you think this person will be on the floor? And, you know, there are ranges to both of those things, but when push comes to shove, like that's really what you're trying to do in some form or fashion. Now, you can get there in multiple different ways. I mean, you can start really basic and then just start building and building. I started a couple years ago just trying to recreate the simple projection system on Basketball Reference, which is just a knockoff of the Marcel projections from baseball. And I just sat down, and I didn't have any experience coding. I didn't have any experience in a database, but I knew what I wanted to do, and I just chipped away till the point where I was able to spit out something that, you know, passed the eye test to start. And then from there, it was just, I got to test these out. And after a couple years, honestly, it's not an overnight process. It takes some time to see the results, see if you have any holes, which, you know, I slowly started to plug as the seasons went on. Jimmy Butler in particular is a guy that has always been sort of a bugaboo for me, but you get there. You slowly take in more information, but when push comes to shove, you're just boiling it down to how good is this person on a rate basis and how much will he be out there.
Jimmy Butler, also a bugaboo for Karl Anthony Towns and his ex-girlfriend.
Oh, God.
The buzz on the street is. Sean asking a question about ML. Go ahead.
I gotta ask a question for a second, because I heard you guys talking about that. I didn't hear anyone else talking about that at all. Did you just make that up?
No, I think that's legit.
No, it's on one of my favorite websites that I used to use a lot as a source when I was at Barstool, Black Sports Online, which is pretty close to the best of the IG thotty girl community and the Black Twitter world, who are pretty reliable sources of this information. And actually, Chris Sheridan reported it yesterday too. That's the reason why.
I forgot to check the thoughts.
When in doubt, just keep your ears to the thought streets, and that's where the truth will be found. They would probably kill in DFS. They would know all the details.
Also, wow, like it must be really not fun to work around Jimmy Butler, huh?
He's just banging your girlfriends and being a dick at practice.
I guess there's nothing else to do in Minnesota. Jake better watch out.
Yes, hide your girlfriend, Jake.
Jimmy Butler
he's
coming
going to
for
be
you.
in Minnesota for long, so we all have to be on high alert. You know,
Yeah.
he could be anywhere in a couple weeks.
He's going to be. If he wants to Miami, he's going to be so exhausted.
If he wants to come to the Hornets, he's got a 3.5 hour drive to get to Wilmington.
Yeah, you're probably safe. You think.
Before we close this out and give the airwaves to Fast Eddie, we should touch on some quick questions for MLB because people are asking about the single game tournaments there. And I think a lot of people have not been playing showdowns in MLB quite as much. So, Alex, how would you approach that? And obviously, the playoffs, I saw you tweet a different game too with relievers. How would you handle a showdown for MLB? Because a lot of people will be playing these playoff MLB games, apparently.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be really exciting because like the way they have the score. Well, I'm only going to talk about DraftKings because I think FanDuel is going to be pretty similar to how you'd expect because it only has batters. DraftKings, though, like the thing is, if a reliever goes out there, first of all, relief innings and strikeouts are worth 50% more than starting pitchers. So if a reliever goes out there, gets an inning, gets a strikeout, gets a save, I think that's worth like 11 points. And in a low-scoring game, that's going to be one of the highest-scoring players of the day, and they're only like 2K. So I think that stacking starting pitcher and one or two relievers could be a really good strategy. So yeah, I definitely refer to Adam Shit My Money's article for our premium members. And I'm also going to have rankings for these relievers. Like they're not grading out like particularly well, but it's because they're only going to play about 50% of the time, like the closer. But that's probably the guy you want, because one team is going to have a save probably, and you're going to want the guy that gets it.
Yes, Michael Pomaska asking in chat. There is an article right now on the homepage from Adam, aka Shit My Money, who is I think that's his channel, right? Yeah. He wrote up everything about the relievers today. So if you're a premium member, go check that out on the homepage. If you're not a premium member, use promo code Contrary, get 1 week free. Go check it out. Get better at the showdown slate tonight. So Alex, on FanDuel, do you like batters for a single game? How would you approach batters for a showdown?
Well, FanDuel's system, they only let you pick batters, so it's not as interesting. But on DraftKings, I'd probably want to stack some batters together because like I'm not expecting as big as scores for batters. It's going to be a pretty low scoring game probably. So having a guy who has the run and the RBI like stacked, that might be your best chance to get some players that have the highest scores on the team.
All right, let's get out of the way for Fast Eddie. But before we do that, let's go around the room. Everybody give your plugs and maybe one final thought that you feel like would help the people out there. Andrew, we'll go to you first.
Plugging away, I got another reason. Use the promo code Contrary. You get access to projections that I'm running for 4 different sports. We got just a lot of cool technical stuff behind the wall that I think is really helpful between the ownership projections and the rankings and the point projections. There's just a lot of stuff that I think can really help you become a better player. And that's the most important thing right now. So that's going to be my final thought. Maybe I'll come up with something more interesting when it comes back around. Maybe
something Great British Baking Show related.
I got to catch up on that. Apparently, I just have the one experience. Josh, I'm going to need your recommendations on seasons.
Right, they're all fantastic. They're all just incredibly polite British people trying to make biscuits and shit.
Josh, how about you? Plugs and any sort of final thoughts?
I don't have a ton of plugs because I'm in this little lull at the end of the baseball season, slowly gearing up for the NBA. So I'm working on my NBA sheet. I'm working on my NBA projections. I mean, there's plenty of great content from everyone at the site, whether that's golf or NASCAR or MMA. We got a big MMA card coming up this weekend. Check out any content we put out for that. So everybody keep checking that stuff out and then slowly wait to get me back on screen for daily NBA videos. It's going to be myself, Adam, Shit My Money, and Laffy rotating through doing a breakdown video in the morning, and then some sort of combination of myself, Chris, and Fast Eddie taking everybody home up until lock. Going to be covering a ton of NBA, so get ready, people. 2 weeks.
Hey, Josh, good news. I might be in some strategy shows too at 7 a.m. Pacific time. I might be. I offered it up, so we'll see what happens.
There you go. There we go.
Alex, how about you? Any parting words for the folks before we let Ed Fast Eddie take over?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just really excited that all the pieces are starting to come together on the site. One thing I think is really useful is we got Fantasy Cruncher and we have the Fan Vice projections run by Andrew, and those two combined, you can use them together for great results. One thing that we have in the works that I'm really excited about is in our lineup builder, it will allow you to find out what percentile your lineup ranks in contrariness and in projection. And I think that's close to like the approach I recommend people use. You want to find something that's high percentile in both, or a good combination of the two. And finally, I'm really excited for tomorrow. It's just the kickoff of the hockey season, and we got some great guys. We got Nolan, Jake. Jake is doing projections for everyone, so you can use those. We got Homer Cleese, and we got Jeff Fotz. So I'm really excited to see what these guys can do, and looking forward to playing some NHL.
Yeah, NHL coming at Jake. As Alex mentioned, Jake will have a stream every day with Homer Cleese, I believe, or at least a rotating person, but definitely a lot of Jake for NHL. Jake, one of the best NHL DFS players in the world, and a very lovely gentleman who I'm going to miss doing a stream with daily. So go check him out. Keep an eye peeled there. Make sure to tune in on to Contrary as well with me, Alex, and Roto World senior editor Evan Silva on Saturday. We love that show. It's a lot of fun. Come up with some contrarian opinions. Sometimes you get the Mitch Trubisky's of the world coming out of Alex's mouth or one of ours. So go tune into that. And we're excited to be with you guys. It's NFL, NBA. This is the busy season. We really appreciate you guys joining us and being a part of this roundtable. And we will see you again very soon. Stay tuned for Fast Eddie coming up, preseason NBA.
Later.